Welcome or welcome back to the Authentically Attuned podcast. I am your host. My name is Esther, and in this episode, we are going to be talking about DL men, but more specifically, we're going to be talking about the selfishness that they show in their behaviors. I am currently working on an episode talking about how to tell if a man is straight, how as women who want to date straight men can we tell if a man is actually straight and desires women. But as I'm working on this episode, I got a little bit off topic in my thinking, as I tend to do, and I just want to say this podcast is not supposed to be a podcast about DL men. There's a lot of other things I want to talk about, but the more I talk about this topic, the more there is to talk about. So I don't know, I'm going to be probably on this topic for a little while. And one of the things that came to mind as I was working on this episode about straight men is how emotionally selfish men like this tend to be. And I want to try to be as sensitive and sympathetic as I can while talking about this, because I do actually feel like at this point I understand I understand how hard it must be emotionally for men who are struggling with this and feel the need to be DL or in the closet. But I have interacted with a few men since I've released my last episode. There have been some men who've commented, there have been some people who've reached out through email, and I'm starting to see similar patterns to what I've noticed in real life interactions with men like this. Is I'm starting to notice a lack of accountability. I think is the best way I can put this. And I think the reason that some of these interactions trigger me is because they remind me a lot of interactions with my ex, and something I realized while I was with him. What I realized when I was with my ex was that it seemed like he was unable to see me as a human being. Like, he was unable to see that I also struggled with a lot of the same things he was struggling with. Even though we talked to each other about everything, I told him things that I've never told anyone in this world. And I could not help but notice he refused to see that we were struggling in similar ways. So, for example, although he was born in a family and he grew up with his mother and father, I was raised by a single mother. My father died when I was 7 years old, but we had a lot of similarities in how our mothers raised us. So his mom was constantly complaining to him about her marriage and venting to him and basically using him as an emotional outlet for a lot of her trauma and projecting a lot of her trauma onto him. My mother did the same thing to me. And that was something I constantly talked to him about within the relationship. Even down to our childhood sexual traumas. I was honest with him about my childhood sexual trauma. He was honest with me about his. And a lot of the emotional reactions we had were similar, but we would show them in different ways. Basically, what I'm trying to say now, and what I've spent a lot of time in that relationship trying to help him understand, is that I feel like Black people, especially Caribbean, African, Black American, like any melanated culture, so that's like, Indians, Filipinos, you know what I'm trying to say. But all of the melanated children and people that I've come across growing up in school and work environments have similar backgrounds in upbringing, in the sense that, like, we don't know how to communicate emotionally. We don't know how to process our emotions. We don't know how to express ourselves in a healthy way without being either shutting down or getting really emotionally reactive and violent, cursing, things like that. But yet I notice in the Black community, Black men have a hard time. Sorry. Some Black men, not all. Okay, don't come for me. Not all Black men, but a lot struggle with being able to realize that, yes, society tells us men struggle with these things emotionally and communicating, and women are better at this and things like that. But I spent a lot of time in that relationship trying to help him see that I don't think that's true. I, as a woman, also grew up in a household where I don't know how to communicate my feelings. I'm better at it now, for sure. But at the time, I didn't. And that's something I had to learn. I didn't just naturally have that programmed in me because I'm a woman. I had to really process my trauma. And I had to realize that even if the world tries to shame me for being who I am, I have to accept and love myself. And just accept that not everyone, there's always going to be people who judge me. There's always going to be people who think I'm weak or whatever. I don't want to get into that, but there's always going to be things that are projected onto me, no matter how real and honest I am as a woman. And that was just something, no matter how many different ways I tried to express to him, he would make it seem like, no, you don't struggle with communication because obviously you want to have these conversations. Like, you see how I'm running away and I'm violent and reactive? That's because I don't want to. That's because I struggle with it. You seem to want it. And that's the difference. And I still don't really know how to put this into words, but I saw that as, it was sad, and it's still sad to me that he saw that as me wanting to, despite not knowing how, me wanting to connect with him, me wanting to figure it out with him. He saw that as, I only want that because I'm a woman, or I'm an emotional woman. I don't know. But in reality, how I see it is because I care about him. I cared about the relationship we were building together. And that's why I made the effort to learn how to communicate better. Read online, find books, buy books, work through my traumas. I really started working on myself within that relationship because I wanted it to work, not because that was just how I was wired as a woman. So I just really understood that he did not see it that way. And now, outside of the relationship, I see that a lot of men have the same perspective, especially men who struggle with their sexualities. They have such a hard time seeing outside of their own pain, and they just feed into what society tries to tell us. Oh, men are like this, women are like that. And no matter what, as a woman, if you could sit there and tell this man your whole life story, your whole lore and trauma and all of that, and explain to him in plain detail that you also don't know how to communicate, and apologize for your reactivity, and explain that you have awareness that this is from your childhood trauma, and he will still look at you like, oh my gosh, women. I could blow my top off with how angry this makes me. And I'm so glad I'm out of that. But every time I think about it, I just shake my head because I'm like, yeah, that is so unfortunate. You cannot make a man like this see outside of his trauma. He has to be willing to believe that there is a him outside of his trauma, that there is a life outside of his trauma, in order for him to see that and then be able to see you as something outside of his trauma. So I hope that made sense. Those who get it. And those who this is for, I know you'll hear this, because it was something that was very hard for me to understand, that I didn't fully understand until after I walked away from that relationship. And that's one of the main reasons that I truly believe that these men are narcissists, because I believe my mother struggles with intense, and has since I was a child, struggled with intense narcissism. and his mother as well, we would talk about this frequently. So it's like they can't see, for example, for my mom, trying to explain to her, whenever I talk about my struggles, it's always been like this. She would then try to top me by talking about her struggles and what she's been through, and kind of like nothing I've been through has, even touched that. And it used to really piss me off. But after everything I've been through, I see now that people who do this, they just cannot see past their own trauma. This is the self-focusedness. I don't know if that's a word, but this is how self-focused they are. I don't even get upset anymore when my mom does this. It just kind of makes me shake my head, and I take a deep breath in and I let it out, because that's all you can do. And I have a very specific example of this when it comes to my mom that I want to share. Basically, early on, when me and my sister were having struggles, I was trying to basically help my mom understand that I believe that a lot of the struggles me and my sister have is because my mother parentified her and made her, do a lot of things to take care of us growing up, since she was the oldest sister. And when I explained this to my mom, she was instantly defensive, and she was just kind of like, oh my gosh, what did she do? I still did everything. I cooked. What did she do besides like babysit you guys when I was at work? She said things like that. And then I started listening to her, things that like even what comes with babysitting, and at the age that she was, in certain things I was listening to her, why that even just babysitting your younger siblings at that age is inappropriate, and how that takes away from her life as a young preteen girl. And my mom just kind of looked at me, and then she just went off and was like, oh, but when I was her age and blah, 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 and just talking about life growing up in Haiti and suffering, basically how like she basically really suffered though. Like that was nothing what my sister went through. Like she really suffered though. And when I tell you, I look back to these moments with my ex and I see just exactly what they mean when they say, if you don't heal your trauma with your parents, you will end up marrying someone just like your parents, and you will repeat that pattern. Because sitting there listening to her say this, and this was after I had broke up with my ex and moved back in with my mom, and I had this conversation with her, it just confirmed to me. I was like, yep, this is exactly what I just walked away from within him. This inability to see outside of yourself, this inability to like have sympathy for anyone else but your inner child. And this is why I believe that for men who are DL and men who are in the closet, I believe this is why they feel like being gay is the end of the world, because that would mean that you're like being thrown to the wolves, and the people who don't have sympathy, the people who think just like them, who can only see their own pain, will now completely devour them. And yeah, like I just get it why the hiding is so important to them. And honestly, I'm afraid of sounding insensitive talking about this. That's why it took me so long to even come out with this episode, because I do have sympathy and I empathize with these men who feel this way. But I understand that I have a very specific situation where I have also struggled with these same feelings as a woman on the opposite end. This feeling of like being attracted to women and also men, and trying to understand where my trauma and how my trauma affected that. So I feel like I understand, but from my experience with my ex, I see that empathizing and being too sympathetic towards this behavior and this like lack of accountability that men take when it comes to this feeling can become really toxic. Because I did that a lot with my ex. I saw that in him and I felt like, oh, well, he's a man and men are like really sensitive about this type of stuff. So I would just like the way I would speak to him about, his trauma and his struggles was very like understanding, to the point where I would not talk about my traumas. Like, although our relationship began with me opening up, talking about my trauma, which led to him opening up, and I was really grateful for that, I see now in hindsight how it became me only catering to his trauma and not talking about mine as much, because I realized every time I tried to relate to him, it would just make him more upset, and it would lead to fights getting worse, and him feeling like I'm not understanding what he's saying, like, since I feel like I could possibly relate to it. And yeah, that's why now I just don't see a positive in like only empathizing with this, only validating their point of view when it comes to this, because I get it. There are these struggles, they're real, they exist, but at what point are these men going to take the same accountability that they want women to take for their traumas, their daddy issues, and things like that? When are men going to take the same accountability? These specific type of men, by the way, not just men in general, the men who are struggling with their sexuality, when are they going to take the accountability to realize that, yes, I have mommy issues, I need to face that, or I have a fear of being judged by society, I need to face that. Okay, so the main point that I'm trying to make in this episode is this: the mindset that men who are DL and in the closet have, that their pain is the worst pain, no one can understand, or just like this is not something that's acceptable at all, is real. But enabling these feelings in men and only trying to understand them without also encouraging them to take accountability is toxic, because it just encourages the hiding. And again, I have been in this position of enabling this within a man who feels like there's just so much hate for who he truly is, or no one will understand who he truly is if he was to just be himself. And I sympathize with this, but I disagree that this is something that justifies hiding and lying to women, especially, and using women to create a false identity. I personally just think that these men need to take accountability and be themselves, and then, grow through whatever chaos comes from that. So the last thing that I want to touch on, and it's funny that it's the last thing, but it's kind of the main thing, and I plan on titling this episode after this specific section of the episode. One thing I've realized is I think a lot of men who refuse to take accountability in this way, or are unable to, I think it has a lot to do with the fact that they want access to all women. They want to be able to be attractive to and desired by all women, or at least a large majority. And I think that this is something that even as a woman I can understand, because this is something I think that women who struggle with accepting that, yeah, a lot of men struggle with their sexuality. A lot of men aren't necessarily on the 100% gay side. So like the reason this is such a struggle, I think, is because if we accept this reality, we have to accept that means that we are not truly desired by a large percentage of men, which means, like, if we're talking out of 100, if there's only 10% of men who are truly desire women and want to love and protect and provide for women, that means that we are only true. That's a small percentage. So you would have to really be single and stay as a sovereign being for a while, until you meet a man who truly is able to meet you where you are and love you in that way, because he desires women like that. So I believe the same is true for men like this. They cannot accept that a large percentage of women will not be okay in accepting and understanding of their true authentic selves as bisexual or as even attractive attracted to men. And that is a reality. I agree with that. That's a fact. I know a lot of women. I don't know many women like me who would be open to being with a man who's bisexual or who is open and honest about his struggles with his sexuality. So I think that men who still acknowledge that the world and society and women are homophobic or whatever, and that's the reason why they hide and lie, they are doing this. A lot of them, maybe not all of them, but a lot of them, I believe, are doing this because they want still those women who don't want bisexual or gay men or men who have any attraction towards other men. They still want those women to desire them and want to be with them. So this is another reason why I think a lot of the men who do this are narcissistic, because it's like this desire to want to be wanted by women that don't even want them. And deep down, they don't want those women that don't even want them for who they truly are. And yeah, I'm not going to get into the women too much, but I also agree that a lot of women do this as well. Maybe I'll do a whole nother episode about that. But I think this is what's truly toxic about these types of men. They don't want to accept, they don't want the women that want them. They want the women that don't want them, because there's a larger percentage of those women. And it's sick, in my opinion. I know that might be like a harsh word, but truly it does make me feel kind of nauseous. And yeah, I think it's just unrealistic and very egotistical and narcissistic of anyone, man or woman, to feel like I want to be attractive and desired by all members of the opposite sex. That's a thought that I feel like I could relate to in the past, very, very recent past, where I felt like that too. And I felt like, well, duh, if I'm a woman, like a man should be attracted to me unless like he's gay. And it's just really not that black and white. And I think the sooner that men start accepting this, they will be more willing to be open and honest with themselves and out of the closet and not DL. I don't think it's like fair to say that these men should wait for all women to not be homophobic in order for them to do that, or for us as women to try to be less homophobic, which obviously we should. But what I'm saying is I don't think that's necessarily the solution. Being as understanding and caring and enabling as I was in my relationship with my ex, it really did not change anything but make me realize that he does not see me for who I am. No matter what I say to him, no matter how understanding I am to his situation, until he realizes that me accepting him should not make or break him, he will always be defensive towards me, and he will always see me as his enemy whenever I try to even tell him that I see him and I still love him. So I don't know, this episode randomly got really emotional for me. So I'm gonna leave this here for now. I'm really glad that I got this out, and I'm really grateful to everyone who has listened up until this point. I appreciate you. Thank you so much for listening, and I will talk to you in my next episode. Bye.